Alright, so you guys know that game Dead by Daylight that I always play? You know, that game that I've sunk so many hours into that it's pretty much become the most played game I've ever played? Well, if you would know, there is a lot of killers in this game. A lot of originals, and a lot of licenses. Now, when it comes to all the killers, I have played pretty much every single killer for a good handful of times. I've played them in different playstyles, I've played them since the beginning, and I've just overall been trying my hardest to enjoy as many of the new killers that comes out. And one thing to know is that when I first got into the game, I got into the game in 2018 when the Spirit was the newest killer. Back when the game was more about stealth rather than just simple looping, and the game wasn't as competitive as it is now, and the Spirit was one of the strongest killers in the game next to the Nurse and Billy. But then one killer came out right after Spirit. And I don't really talk about my killer mains much whenever I talk about Dead by Daylight, because I don't really, just didn't really think it mattered, because I try to play all the killers evenly. But if I had to say, I would say that my killer main in Dead by Daylight has to 100% be the Legion. Oh, guys, come on! He's really not that bad. Like, it's really not that bad. Hold on, just let me explain, please. I promise. So yes, my killer main is the Legion. I have played the Legion from their PTB all the way to their current state, and at the time of this, I have just recently gotten my Legion to Prestige 100, because that is just how much I care about this killer. And the Legion, who released on December 11th, 2018, which was actually 3 days before my birthday, which made it feel even cooler, not only was this the first new chapter to come out in my time of playing DBD, but also just me being able to get a killer on the same day that he came out. Because at the time, you know, I was just a small child. I didn't have money. So Dead by Daylight had this whole concept of the iridescent shards. And the iridescent shards in Dead by Daylight can be used to purchase non-licensed characters. And at the time, each one was about 9,000 shards. And I believe that's what the new original DLC characters are, but like they lowered the price of a lot of the old original ones. So nowadays the Legion is probably a lot cheaper, but back in the day they were all 9,000. And not only did the Legion come out, but we also got the new survivor Jeff Johansson, and we got the new map Mount Ormond Resort. And I was just such in awe that I was able to play this game and get this killer from day one. And I also made a video on me playing the Legion when they first came out. But I don't really want to get too much into that video, since at the time my videos looked like this. And it wasn't really that great. So, what I kind of just wanted to do, since I finally got Legion to Prestige 100, and the Legion has been out for so many years, and they've gotten so many changes, I kind of just wanted to go over my experience, seeing all the different people talking about the Legion at the time, and just seeing how much the Legion has changed from their PTB all the way to now, and just kind of discussing what I think might happen in the near future for Legion, because I do really care about this killer. I know a lot of people don't like this killer, and I totally get it, but I will get into that in a little bit. But for now, I want to go all the way back to when I first ever played the Legion. Now, back in the day with Dead by Daylight, there wasn't a lot of documentation compared to nowadays. Nowadays, almost everything that gets changed, every new update gets documented somewhere on like the DBD wiki, or just people playing it. But back in the day, around that time of the Legion coming out, there wasn't really a lot of documentation apart from just YouTubers that were simply just playing the PTB because they were already into Dead by Daylight at the time. But the first time that I remember playing the Legion, I remember hearing that the new killer was coming out, and I remember my friend Gage, who was the one that got me into the game and actually got me Dead by Daylight, told me about the new killer coming out and how to actually get into the PTB to play as that killer. And I was insanely excited because not only did I get to play this killer early, but I got to play him for free. And this was a brand new killer that nobody's ever seen before. So I loaded up the PTB, and I don't remember too much about it. I vaguely remember playing on the new Ormond and playing as Jeff, and I also vaguely remember playing like 1 or 2 matches of Legion because at the time, queue times in Dead by Daylight were significantly worse on PTB. Also mainly because back in the day the game was peer-to-peer connection, meaning that if I wanted to play a match, I was the host of the server, while all the survivors in the lobby would be connecting to my internet, which would lead to a lot of things where, like, if I had bad connection, they had bad connection, but I wouldn't feel it because I was a host. Or just like, you know, if there was somebody who was cheating or hacking, it would, you know, be able to expose your internet pretty much, but, you know, that's a whole other topic for another day. But basically, yeah, the Legion has been out since all the way back in 2018, and when they did release, they were pretty similar to their PTB. The first few people that I remember posting videos regarding the Legion was YouTubers like Noob3, who, if you've been in the Dead by Daylight community for a long time, you would know Noob3 is one of the most highly respected people, and also had one of the more sad downfalls on his YouTube, mainly due to a bunch of copyright stuff with his videos. But nowadays he doesn't really post much, but the first time I ever saw his content was when he played the Legion.
He kind of fucked up. That's a bit awkward. And you want to get a flashlight save, huh? No, thank you. And we found...
And I also got into seeing the YouTuber Demi, or Demi Plays, and that was the first video I also saw of him, was him playing the Legion.
I don't actually know if anyone's on my room because I can't see it. Oh, no, fucking Hagrid was on it. You're a wizard, Harry! Get over here, you fat fuck. Don't drop that. Oh, see you around, God Pallet. Yeah, you? Oh, yeah. Oh, whoa. I can chain this shit. I forgot. Yeah, you? Get out of here, fam.
And another YouTuber that I saw playing the Legion was True Talent, and you know, True Talent is known in the Dead by Daylight community now. Not really known for very good reasons, but he does exist and people know that he exists. And when Legion first came out, from PTB to live, he was actually quite different from how he is in the current state, which you would expect. So what were some of the major differences between first release Legion to now? Well, for starters, he was a 4.4 killer, meaning he was the same movement speed as Huntress, Deathslinger, Chunky. He was basically just a slower killer. Or even like Spirit. He was the same movement speed as Spirit. That's because they both came out at the same time. And, you know, that might sound really bad because it's an M1 killer. Why would you need an M1 killer to be 4.4? Well, he used to move significantly faster in Frenzy, and not only that, he used to vault pallets and windows significantly faster in Frenzy. And Feral Frenzy actually only lasted, like, less than 10 seconds. It was like you would literally use it and it would just go away if you didn't do anything within a couple seconds. So Legion, right off the bat, in terms of just movement, was significantly different because they ran and they also vaulted things quicker, but their base movement speed was 4.4. And they did have a standard terror radius as well. Now, when it comes to their actual Feral Frenzy power, it was fairly similar, but different enough to where it felt completely different. So the way Feral Frenzy used to work was every time you would get a Feral slash on somebody, similar to how he is now, you could see the killer instinct of anybody around you, which further incentivized the whole playstyle of being able to stab one person and basically go and chain other stabs on other people. And that was what I assumed was the original play intent for Legion, because that just made sense. Like, why would you let me see the killer instinct of other survivors if you didn't expect me to go towards them? And especially with how fast Legion used to move back then, it just made sense. Now, one thing to also keep in mind is around this time, Deep Wound was a brand new mechanic. Legion was the first killer to ever bring in Deep Wound. And you might be thinking, oh, but what about Borrow Time? That came out before Legion. Well, Borrow Time worked in a completely different way. It didn't use Deep Wound in any way. You didn't go into a Deep Wound state. You couldn't mend yourself if you used BT. It was a completely different perk, and that's also another conversation for another day, because it was a really weird time in Dead by Daylight. But one thing to also keep in mind is that while, yes, what I assumed was the intended playstyle of chaining hits on every survivor with Feral Frenzy, one thing that was also something you could do as Legion is every time you M1 somebody with your Feral Frenzy and then hit them again with Feral Frenzy, you would actually take off a chunk of their mending. Now, what this meant is that theoretically, if you Feral Frenzied somebody and stabbed them multiple times with Frenzy, you would actually be able to down them with Frenzy. And I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, but don't you have to wait for your whole cooldown to come back? Well, the thing was with Legion back then, is that you didn't have to wait for your entire cooldown of your power and wait for it to fully recharge to use it. It only had to recharge maybe less than a quarter before you could use it again, making it pretty easy to use in the middle of chase, especially if you're going to go for this playstyle of just continuously stabbing one person until they eventually died. And back in the day, the add-ons for Legion were also significantly different, because a lot of them were related to the cooldown of his power. There was also add-ons that related to extending his power with no downsides at all. And some of his add-ons were just not really super necessary, because a lot of his add-ons did the same thing, because back in the day, add-ons weren't really like super in-depth like we have now, where each killer has add-ons that sometimes change their power completely. But with Legion, there were a lot of add-ons that actually decreased the deep wound timer just from stabbing somebody. Meaning that there was a playstyle at the time where you could literally stab somebody with 3 hits of Feral Frenzy and instantly down them. And the 2 best known add-ons that I saw for this, the 3 best add-ons I saw for this was Frank's Mixtape, Cold Dirt, and Stab Wound Study. Now, when it came to these 3 add-ons, basically, Frank's Mixtape and Deep Wound Study, both of those add-ons were designed around the idea of decreasing the deep wound timer on a survivor when you first hit them with Feral Frenzy. Now, Frank's Mixtape, every time you would do a second Feral Frenzy slash, it would decrease it more but than what it's supposed to do by default. But with Stab Wound Study, when you first hit them in Frenzy, it already takes off a small chunk of their deep wound bar, basically making it so that, yeah, you could just down them in 3 hits. And the only reason Cold Dirt, which I believe now has been changed to the BFF's locket on current Legion, basically the old version of Cold Dirt basically just decreased the cooldown of you getting stunned out of your power. And basically that was mainly just used that way you could catch jump to people if you needed to catch jump to them. And I believe it was the old Julie's Mixtape also decreased the cooldown, making it easier to get out of your power pretty much instantly and then be able to catch up to somebody, compared to nowadays where Legion has no cooldown add-ons and he has a base 4-second cooldown. And you can already imagine that because of this, people were not happy with the Legion. People thought that the Legion was way too strong. They thought that it just wasn't really good. And it wasn't really fun for a lot of people, because a lot of the time, and especially because back then, Deep Wound was a lot more specific than it is now. With Deep Wound nowadays, you just basically have to be running around to make sure your timer is paused. But back then, you had to be in a chase for your Deep Wound timer to pause. which back then the chase mechanic was already pretty finicky as it was, but basically what that meant was that a lot of Legion players as well, what they would do at the time was basically chase one person, put them in the deep wound, and then pretty much chase them so loosely to where the game doesn't consider it a chase, meaning that their deep wound timer just goes down and they just die. And that was one of the strategies as Legion back then. And yeah, with Frank's Mixtape and Cold Dirt, you pretty much were able to down somebody in 3 frenzy hits, or even with Stab Wound Steady in Frank's Mixtape, pretty much allowing you to down somebody in 3 hits with frenzy. And a lot of people didn't really find this fun, especially since back in the day, because you vault windows, it made it fairly easy to just get these hits for free. And I know a lot of people are also going to be thinking, oh, but if I just make them miss, then they go out of their power. It's fine. Like, I can literally just dodge them good enough to where they come out of their power. And that was also not a viable strategy, because back in the day, Legion, whenever they used Frenzy, if they missed an attack, they would just have a significantly reduced cooldown. Basically meaning that every time they missed, they could just swing again. Basically allowing them to just swing as much as they want. And one strategy that not a lot of people really saw, but I saw it from the YouTuber Farmer John back in the day, was being able to actually gain distance from just lunging over and over because of just how much distance you get from it. So Legion was in a very, very scary state at the time, because anytime somebody played Legion, you already knew basically back then how they were going to play. You already knew that they were either going to be loosely chasing you so that way you died to deep wound, or they were going to be running the strongest add-ons to down you in 3 hits. And it's really funny because back in the day, a lot of people DC'd against Legion. Quite possibly, people DC'd back then against Legion compared to, in the same way as people would DC against, Skull Merchant nowadays. Which some people might just find crazy because it's Legion. Why are you DCing against a Legion? But back then, Legion was just so broken and had just so many issues regarding their power that it was basically just it just wasn't really fun to go against at the end of the day. And I do admit, I was one of the people that used to use Frank's Mixtape Cold Dirt and Frank's Mixtape and Stab Wound Study. I used to be one of the people to run these, because it was just the only way to win, because otherwise you're playing an M1 killer that you either have to just not chase somebody, or you have to stab them 6 times with base kit Feral Frenzy to get it down on somebody. So back then, Legion was a mix of not very strong, but add-ons to make them so strong that people wanted to DC. And it was very clear that the devs knew about this, and they wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And this was and then after a couple months of people having to deal with this new Legion, this was when Behavior first rolled out their biggest patch to change the Legion. Now, it wasn't until patch 2.7.0 when the devs finally announced and said, yep, we know that the Legion is really strong and we are going to be reworking the Legion. And when I first heard about these changes, I was a little bit worried because this was a killer I really cared about. So I was it only did nothing but concern me, because I was well, if this killer becomes even worse or something like that, I don't know if I'm going to want to play them anymore. So let me just kind of break down the differences between the Legion from release and the changes in 2.7.0 Legion. So one of the main differences was that Legion was now a 4.6 killer instead of 4.4 killer, meaning he was the same movement speed as Trapper, Wraith, Billy, pretty much every majority of every killer in the game. He had a base movement speed of 4.6, and it makes it makes sense. And one thing to keep in mind as well is they also changed the way Deep Wound works, basically making it so as long as you were in the killer's terror radius, then the Deep Wound timer would pause. That would also cause some issues later, because people could just run undetectable and stealth perks, so eventually they did have to change it to the way it is now. But back in the day, that was a very good change, because it meant that you weren't just gonna die instantly if the Legion was just not chasing you, pretty much. Now, both of these are actually really good changes, but the changes to their power are a little bit of a different story. First off, their power was increased, so it did last longer, which was a really good change, because even though Feral Frenzy was pretty strong with certain add-ons, it did only last for like 5 or 6 seconds, meaning that you had to make your decisions really quick or you just weren't going to get any value. And as well as you actually moved slower than you did when Feral Frenzy first came out. So basically they just increase your base movement speed, but decrease the movement speed in Feral Frenzy. Like, you still moved faster. But it wasn't like, it just wasn't really as fast, and it was pretty noticeable how slow you were. Not only that, but they decreased the speed of vaulting windows and pallets. And I specifically remember this thinking it was a stupid change, because the whole point of Legion is to basically be able to vault at the same speed as a survivor. And that was how they vaulted back in the day. They vaulted the same speed as a survivor. So when you just increased it, it just made it feel like you couldn't do anything, because like by the time you vaulted the window, the survivor gained more distance than they would have gained if you vaulted it at the same speed that they did. Now, and another thing as well to keep in mind is that they also did increase the cooldown duration, and they made it so you couldn't use your power after waiting for like a quarter of it to recharge. You had to wait for the full recharge time for it to come back. And not only that, but whenever you swung in Feral Frenzy and you missed, you would get instantly put out of your power. And this was one of the biggest changes for me that I wasn't really a fan of, because it literally just meant, because at the time, you know, I wasn't that good in the game, so it pretty much just meant that if you miss your Feral Frenzy, you had to wait the entire, like, 20-second cooldown for your power to come back so you can actually use it again. And on top of that, if you also got stunned, not only would it take you out of your power, but it would just take the entire power bar away. Meaning that if you Feral Frenzied, the moment you got stunned, the whole power gauge was just gone. So you had to wait for the entire thing to recharge. And yeah, overall, Legion just felt significantly worse than they used to. They weren't as fast, you couldn't really get as much value out of Feral Frenzy. They did make some of the add-ons better, like they did nerf some of the cooldown add-ons, so that way you couldn't get that instant cooldown that you could back in the day. But they did also, like, they did also change the add-ons to, like, increase the duration of Feral Frenzy, which that was also a really good change, because it just meant that you could use Feral Frenzy for longer on top of the additional, like, 5 or 6, on top of the additional 4 or 5 seconds they added to Feral Frenzy. But Legion at the time was basically just a killer that would apply the borrowed time status and nothing else. Like, their cooldown was too long for you to be able to use it consistently. Whenever they got out of their power, their cooldown was long enough for a survivor to basically gain so much distance that you pretty much have to play catch up, and by then, you know, they're already going to be at another safe tile. D-Boon basically did literally nothing other than just put them in the injured state with one extra effect. You couldn't really do anything with the Feral, or with the Deep Wound after stabbing them. I know there was a build that people made where you could use, I believe, Stab Wound Study and Frank's Mixtape. There was a build that you could center around that, as well as going undetectable to be able to down people in Feral Frenzy, but it was literally just a gimmick build to bring back old Legion. It really was not viable, and it was just made no sense to use. So back in the day, around this time, Legion players definitely took a really hard hit, and I still play Legion after this because I just found them fun. I still just enjoy running around and being able to stab people, and sometimes, you know, you could even make a build around stabbing people infinitely, because that was one thing that I've noticed that Legion players could do, is that because compared to modern Legion, where you stab people 5 times and the 5th hit down somebody, with old Legion, you could just stab people infinitely in Frenzy, meaning that if they were all in really bad positions, by the time they mended, you would just run up to them, stab them, and just keep the cycle going. Because back in the day, people didn't really know the best ways to counter Legion at the time, so it made sense. But yeah, these changes in 2.7.0 just really hit Legion hard. It really just, it really hurt them as a killer. It was not really They were not viable in any way. They were just a M1 killer with an ability to vault pallets and windows, basically. And Legion was like that for a couple years, actually. They were like that for a long time. And they did get some quality of life changes, and they did get a few buffs. Like, they did increase the Feral Frenzy movement speed again, but it wasn't as much as it was when he first came out. It was only a little bit, but it did feel a lot better. And they also brought back the vaulting at the same time as Survivors, which was really nice. And the quality of life of being able to sprint to pause your deep wound timer, or mend, or when you're mending, it pauses the deep wound timer, because that wasn't how it was back in the day. Back in the day, if you were mending, the timer would still go down. So that was those were some nice changes, and they did nerf the Legion though, because back in the day, Legion's Feral Frenzy was considered a basic attack, because back in the day there was no real such thing as special attacks. Meaning that perks like Sloppy Butcher, Save the Best for Last, and pretty much any perk that revolved around you M1ing somebody would apply while you were in Feral Frenzy. And they did nerf that. So Legion was also one of the killers that also did kind of introduce the whole special attack thing. And it was like this for just quite a long time. They just literally just did some small buffs and some small changes to make Legion a little bit more playable, but the Legion for years was just not really that good. And it wasn't until patch 5.7.0 when the Legion finally got a full rework and changed how they work to make them actually good again. Now, the Legion in the patch 5.7.0 did get a lot of significant changes, and I will stress that I can't stress this enough that at the time I wasn't even playing Dead by Daylight. This was at the time when I took my big break and I wasn't even posting, I wasn't making videos, and around the time I didn't even know this was happening because I just wasn't playing DBD at the time. It wasn't until I was informed by my friend Anthony that there was a patch that they buffed Legion, because he knows that I like Legion. So I did eventually load up Dead by Daylight to look at the PTB, because this was also the PTB that they first reworked Haddonfield, and just brought in a whole bunch of new changes. And I played the new Legion, and the new Legion at the time was pretty much the same as he is nowadays. So basically, to break it down, compared to the changes before the current version. Basically, the Legion, now, every time the Legion hits somebody with Feral Frenzy, they gain a little bit more movement speed. So it was basically like a compensation for nerfing his movement speed to be slower, basically making it so that way, yeah, you could basically just go back to being quicker than you used to be. And around this time, they would also change the add-on Mural Sketch, so instead of just increasing the duration of Frenzy, it actually increases the distance you gain by stabbing somebody even more, making you move even faster. And then the biggest change by far to Legion was after hitting 4 Feral Frenzy slashes on people. The 5th time you would hit somebody with a Feral Frenzy, it would instantly down them, whether they were healthy, injured, deep wounded. Doesn't matter. If you hit them on that 5th hit, it was an instant down. And that actually made Legion basically play like how I always played them, which was you have to go and chain hits to get value out of your power, and then the instant down was just a benefit. It was just like a reward for getting 4 Feral Frenzy hits. Not only was it a reward, but it actually made it so you would like want to use the power more in chase. Now, and there was a lot of other buffs that were changed as well, such as whenever you went out of your power, the power immediately starts filling back up, and you also did not lose all of your entire bar whenever you went into cooldown. The duration of the fatigue from like when you got stunned was reduced again by like a second. And it was just, like, everything about Legion was really nice. And as well at the time, they added a bunch of changes to the tear radius and the chase music, which I think was some of the coolest shit that they could have ever done for a killer. Because it totally makes sense, because the Legion, as a group, are just a bunch of teenagers. So it totally makes sense to change their terror radius and chase music, and they did it in one of the best ways imaginable, because not only did they just change the terror radius and the chase music, but every mixtape add-on, the Susie's mixtape, Julie's mixtape, Joey's mixtape, and Frank's mixtape, and the Fuming mixtape, which is the Iridescent add-on, actually change the way that the song is played. And I will actually just real quickly, I will kind of just play it for a few minutes. I will play every single version of it just so you get an idea of what I mean, because it's all really, really cool. Now, coupled with all the buffs and all the changes, plus the new unique terror radius, it made Legion in one of the best states that we've seen in years, because it combined the playstyle of being able to run really fast with a knife, as the devs put it in the patch notes, being able to run really fast with a knife and be able to just catch up to people really quickly, vault over windows and pallets and stab them, but also brought in the concept of the changes to Legion after release of being able to chain Feral Frenzy slashes and pretty much just put it all in one power that basically just benefits you from using your power. And I know to this day people still don't like the Legion. Whether it was just from having a sour feeling about them because they used to play against them back in the day, or because of the things about Legion nowadays that some people don't like, which I will be getting into, Legion is still not a very respected killer, but at least people, from what I've noticed, are still willing to play against him a little bit more than back in the day. Now, when it also comes to the Legion, because like I said, I've been playing the Legion since the PTB to now, and I've enjoyed playing them, just playing every single match of them. So what I wanted to do is, because I just recently got Legion to P100, as I stated before, so what I want to do is kind of just go over basically what I've noticed from the past couple months or even the past couple years of playing Legion. Mostly basically just from the time that I was playing Legion since the rework to now where I have them at P100. I kind of just want to go over some of the builds that I've tried and just basically go over just everything that I've done as Legion to try and make them the strongest that they can be, what's worked and what hasn't worked. So basically, since I've played the Legion from the very beginning, I basically at the time would use basically the same builds that I would run on most killers that I would find viable, which at the time were mainly perks like Ruin, Barbecue, Sloppy Butcher, and things like that. But then I started realizing that Legion, because of their ability to injure people so fast, some of the best builds for Legion were anti-healing builds. And even if you weren't doing like full-on anti-healing, you just had some perks to decrease healing a little bit, Legion was still able to benefit off of that. So a lot of the perks that I would run during that time would be like Thanatophobia, which is basically every time you get an injury on somebody, it decreases their progress on generators, doing totems, and basically just makes everything slower for each person that's injured. And each stack you get of it increases it until you get to everybody injured, which is a full 20% slowdown. And one of the other perks I would always run is Sloppy Butcher, because even if I wasn't using it for Frenzy, being able to just M1 somebody after downing them from Frenzy and still applying the Sloppy Butcher effect by the time I down them with a regular attack, it just meant that they would be even slower when healing. Another one of my favorite perks that I used to run on Legion is Blood Echo, which is basically, it did get buffed recently as well to make it even better on Legion, where basically every time you hook somebody, any survivor that's injured becomes exhausted and they get the hemorrhage status effect. I believe that's which one it is. And basically, it just made it so every time you hook somebody, everybody that was injured would get a bunch of downsides, which for Legion is really good because their whole entire power is making everybody injured. And Legion also does benefit from a lot of really good like gen defense perks, like gen kicking perks, especially if you run the add-on Frank's Mixtape, which, if you remember what I said, back in the day, Frank's Mixtape used to decrease the deep wound timer whenever you stab somebody. Nowadays, pretty much what Frank's Mixtape does is every time you kick a generator or a breakable wall, it increases the speed by 20% for a generator and 30% for a breakable wall. And what this also means is that every time you kick these things, your power is paused, basically making it so you can increase your power and make it last even longer than it would have just by running this add-on. And it was really good. It's really good. A lot of people see it as like, I personally feel like it's a very underrated add-on because there's not a lot of people that I see actually run it. And it's just really good, especially if you're running gen kicking perks, because yeah, you just frenzy around the map and you can literally kick gens and then pause your timer. And running perks like Nowhere to Hide, which lets you see people's ores whenever you kick a generator, basically just makes it so you have your power for longer and you can find survivors a lot easier whenever you kick generators in your frenzy. Another one of my favorite little perk and add-on combos I like to run is the current version of Julie's Mixtape and using the perk Enduring Spirit Fury. Sometimes I use just Enduring by itself, because basically with Julie's Mixtape, it basically just means every time you get stunned by a pallet, your power is instantly filled all the way back up. No matter at what point it is, no matter how low you've gotten it down to, the moment you get stunned by a pallet, it instantly refills. So being able to run this with like Enduring, and then being able to run something like the Iridescent Button, which makes it so when you vault a pallet in Feral Frenzy, it breaks instantly. Being able to just combine these and being able to get rid of pallets and just still apply damage with Feral Frenzy, it just made it so much nicer to play Legion at pallet loops, because you didn't have to worry about the pallet as much because you could just pretty much commit through them. As well as, you know, being able to slow down gens using Ruin and Fuming Mixtape. That was another double combo that I really liked using, because Ruin did get a bunch of nerfs, so it's not at the used to be 200% slowdown that it used to be. But combining it with Fuming's Mixtape basically does bring that back, and Fuming's Mixtape basically decreases all the generator's progress if the survivors aren't working on it while you're in Feral Frenzy. And not only that, but you get to see the aura of the generator in white, which will slowly change to red depending on how much progress it has, basically making it so you know which gens are being worked on, and it just made it so much nicer. And it just made it nice to be able to use Frenzy more without actually using it in a chase. You could just use it for mobility and know that you're still getting value out of it at the end of the day. And once again, keep in mind, all of these mixtapes change the way the chase music sounds, meaning if you combine two of them, they both work and actually change the song. Now, another build that I also really liked running is basically a speed build with Legion, using their BFF's token add-on, which I believe is what Cold Dirt got changed into, which is the BFF's locket, which basically the way that add-on works is every time you hit a chain of Feral Slash hits on people, you would gain tokens, and the tokens would increase by 1 for every single, or it would increase based on how many hits you got. So if you got 1 hit, you got no tokens, but if you got 2 hits, you got 2 tokens, 3 hits, 3, and up until you get the 5th hit. And you don't even just have to chain Feral Frenzy slashes too. You could literally just hit somebody with it and then hit them again, and you still at least get 2 tokens. But basically, once you get to more than 15 tokens, once the exit gates are powered, meaning when all 5 gens are completed, you gain a 6% haste for the entire endgame. So combining that with perks like batteries included and just some other like haste perks that you want to use of your choice basically make it so Legion is a insanely fast killer in the end game, meaning that it's so much easier to catch up to people and do things. Like I know one of my favorite things to do is run this and then run like batteries included and machine learning, because machine learning from the singularity basically makes it so you get haste and undetectable whenever the generator you kick for the second time gets completed. And it's all very nice. The Legion's add-ons have been changed in such a way to actually make them like basically you can have multiple different play styles, kind of in the same way that people can use Michael Myers as different add-ons to make him into a different killer. You can use that with Legion's add-ons to basically make them into a different killer. Now, we still do have some add-ons that I'm pretty sure have been the same since the beginning, being stuff like the Legion pin, where, like, you know, you injure somebody, and if they mend by themselves, they become broken, you know, further increasing into the anti-heal thing. Another add-on combo I've also been a fan of is the Mural Sketch and the Never Sleep Pills, which the Never Sleep Pills was another add-on that did get changed. Or I believe it was added, It wasn't even, like, changed from another add-on, it was just added. But basically, because Mural Sketch increases your movement speed in Frenzy for each person you hit, it works pretty well with Never Sleep Pills, because Never Sleep Pills increases your Feral Frenzy duration by 10 seconds, basically meaning that you have 20 seconds of Feral Frenzy, which to some people is really nice. But the only downside to this is that whenever you use it, your Feral Frenzy movement speed is your base movement speed. Meaning that if you use this in Feral Frenzy, while you do have a power that lasts for longer, you're not moving quicker. But then that's where Mural Sketch comes in to change everything. So it literally is just you can use Never Sleep Pills to have a longer power and increase your movement speed for every person you hit. Basically meaning that you get to just move quicker overall. And then there's stuff like the Etched Ruler, which makes them oblivious, which means that you could just use it in a, like, stealth Legion kind of way. There's stuff like the Mischief List that increases it by 2 seconds, which is just nice to have in some scenarios. Or there's stuff like the Friendship Bracelet, which actually increases your lunge from Feral Frenzy, basically meaning that if your power's about to end, you can lunge and get a little bit more distance, meaning you might be able to hit somebody. Legion just has so many different add-ons that not only just change your playstyle, but also are just nice to just use every now and then. Like, it's always nice to kind of change up your build on Legion from time to time, which makes sense because there are 4 of them. So it's literally just the whole idea of having 4 different killers with with add-ons to change how you want to play the Legion. And it's all just really, really nice, and, you know, and Legion in its current state is by far, like, in my opinion, one of the best that we've ever gotten for a killer change. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about before I end this video is the possible future of Legion. Now, the devs have not said whether or not they are going to be buffing the Legion or even changing anything about them anytime soon. But the only reason I am theorizing about possible changes for the Legion is because they announced that later on, within like the next year or so, like in January, I believe, they're going to be changing the way that the deep wound mechanic works. And, you know, because of Legion, that is literally their entire power, putting people into deep wound. So whether or not the changes are going to be good or bad, we don't know. But depending on how they do this, this might have either a significant or an insignificant effect on Legion. Because Legion, their entire power is not only just injuring people, but putting them into deep wound. So depending on how they rework the deep wound, it might actually affect how you play Legion, and it might affect how Feral Frenzy works. Because they didn't say that they were changing Legion at the same time. They don't plan on changing the Legion as far as we know. So we don't know. Maybe they're gonna change Legion when Feral Frenzy, or when the Deep Wound changes come out. Maybe they're gonna have nothing to do with Legion. Maybe it's not gonna even affect Legion. We just don't know. And I do hope that, like, if it does change, it changes for the better for Legion. Because while I do enjoy this killer, and I play this killer all the time, I love playing this killer, I really do hope that whatever they decide to change does help Legion for the better when it comes to Feral Frenzy, because I just think that the Legion does deserve a little bit more love, considering that they're one of the few killers that simply just don't get changes anymore. And I don't blame them, because Legion is in a pretty solid place right now. Like, they're not super strong, but they're also not super weak either. Like, they're in that middle ground of, like, you know, like, they're not super strong, but you can still play them and actually be able to kill people with them. And that shows, and I feel like that definitely does show, especially since how long I've played this killer. From the very beginning to now, I definitely think that the current version of Legion is pretty good, and I'm fairly happy with it. But I'm just hoping that if they do decide to change Deep Wound, I hope it affects Legion for the better, and even if it doesn't affect it, I just hope eventually they could give out some buffs, because a lot of people in the community that are Legion mains, like the 3 people, I guess, they all have, a lot of people have thought about different changes to Legion. Some of them good, some of them not so good, but at the end of the day, Legion is a pretty basic M1 killer with an ability that, if you're able to master the ability and basically use the add-ons correctly and play in in different playstyles, you can always get value out of your Feral Frenzy. Feral Frenzy can always be used in every scenario depending on how you play. And that's just the one thing I like about Legion, because for me, Dead by Daylight has always been about the chase. Whether you're playing Killer or Survivor, because even though I am a Survivor main, playing Legion basically brings that whole chase idea from my Survivor gameplay into Killer. And that's just what I find the best about Dead by Daylight, is the chase, because that's where you get the most action, that's where everything comes from, that's where like the most fun of it can come from sometimes, and it's just something that I think is really important, especially for a killer like Legion, whose entire power is running at survivors really quickly to injure them. So I do hope that Legion gets some changes, and even if they don't, I just hope that the Deep Wound changes that they do further increase their strength to make them even just a little bit better than their current state. Because I do think they're in a pretty good state, but I hope that the Deep Wound changes just add a little bit more benefit to playing Legion. And I think that's where I'm gonna end it. I know this is a very random video for me to make. I know that this was just kind of out of nowhere, and it's a very weird topic to go over, just talking about Legion as a killer, but I don't know, just me getting to P100 just gave me the motivation to want to talk about this killer more, because yeah, I do find this killer very fun, and I've been maining them for years since they first came out, and I know a lot of people might find that stupid, but I do believe that Legion is a pretty interesting killer once you actually go into them and actually learn them a little bit more. But yeah, so if you want to make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're new. If you want to check out all my other Dead by Daylight like topics and discussions and stuff like that, you could check out my whole playlist on Dead by Daylight, where I have videos of me playing the game and me discussing the game, stuff like that. And just check out my other videos if you would like to, because I have videos on some other games that I feel like some people might be interested in, even if they're not. It might just be interesting just to look into seeing me talk and voice my opinions over things a little bit more, even though I kind of have some very iffy opinions on certain things in games. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and yeah, if you want to check out all my other videos, you can. Yeah, so thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one, possibly within a year, since I still have to spend all my 508-year cakes on Legion. But alright, I'll see you guys later.